I'm Suzanne. I've been in product for about 10 years, and I've been at AppNexus for the bulk of that time. AppNexus is an advertising technology company based in New York, and I joined the company when we were about 20 people, and we were acquired this year, I guess last year, in 2018 by AT&T. We were about 1,000 people, and AT&T has a new advertising unit that was about 300 people, and so we kind of merged. They moved into our offices in New York, and we've spent the last 6 months or so trying to kind of integrate and figure out how to work together and make something really great out of our shared core competencies and assets. So it's been a really interesting journey. So I have a lot of experience with very different stages of companies, from like a very small startup to a massive Fortune 10 corporation now. More in the former than the latter. So I'm just going to dive right in. I thought I would lead with a positive, inspiring message that the internet told me, which is that product roadmaps are a waste of time. So for me, especially in the startup mentality, trying to create a roadmap where you're like, in 2 years, like, we might still exist. You kind of end up with just a lot more questions than answers. And I think if you're a startup and you have a really clear roadmap, this is me opining. I haven't done any studies to prove this, but it feels like if you know exactly what you need to build and you're like on your path, like you're probably not really creating something new, because you're probably like, oh, this is like a well-established market and I know exactly what the competitors do and this is how I'm going to fit in. And maybe that's true, maybe that's not. I don't know if that opinion is correct or not, but it certainly wasn't my experience being part of a startup. It was very much like you have a bunch of questions. You almost have like a question roadmap or like a list of things that you think would be cool to try out, and you just prioritize those. And so I think the definition of a roadmap really can change based on where a company is and based on the kind of mix of maturity, like things you want to go refine and like really kind of keep the door closed behind you on, like continue to hold your competitive edge, versus going into more of a discovery mode. So basically, I think there's lots of different types of product roadmaps, and I think you will waste your time if you choose the wrong one for the state you're in and the kind of like needs that you have as a business. So I found an article that kind of like encapsulated these three major types of product roadmaps. I'm sure there's 50, but I linked to it. If anybody gets these slides, you can go look. There's a Medium article. But I think basically, if I were to summarize it, they called it the biggest kind is the problem roadmap. And I think this is for that discovery mode. Either you're a startup or you're a company that's like making big bets, like the other bets category in Google's financial returns, which I like. It's just like the grab bag. And basically, again, you're kind of like keeping track of either opportunities or problems that you observe that need to be solved that you think probably haven't been solved right. And you can't do too many of those things at once because it requires a lot of investment to iterate toward product market fit in that type of mode. And so that's like, I think, a really exciting type of roadmap to be tasked with going and solving as a product manager, but it's also very risky. So that's one. The second one is what we can call the customer benefit roadmap. So this is, you have an established sort of foothold in a market, and you understand what your customers need, and you understand what they value in a product, and you're basically prioritizing like continuing to add value or retain value for your customers in like some sort of an orderly fashion, right? And you get the whole company rallied around that, and everyone understands why you're doing what you're doing because they know what the customers are looking for. So that's second. And then the third one is the fine-grained feature roadmap, which could also be kind of like thought of as your backlog for an individual Scrum team or project team, where it's within. So you double click into one of these customer benefit areas, and you have ownership over, like, I'm in charge of, making our product as efficient for the user as possible, or, I'm in charge of making our APIs like as robustly integrated with all the other partners as possible. And you can kind of like within that little kind of narrow frame, you get this fine-grained list of like, okay, here's all the to-do list we have to go tackle. And that's not to say it's just like a check-the-box process. I don't want to diminish that process. It can still be like full of experimentation, iteration, lots of discovery, but it's just like a different level of granularity. And so I have this like roadmap-y line going to item number 2, because that's where I wanted to start out the conversation. It's where the current stage of the product that I manage is sort of situated in terms of our maturity at this particular time. And so I have the most fresh materials to share from this. But I've been involved in all 3. So if people want to learn more about 1 or 3, we can guide the conversation. So let's dive in a little bit more into number 2. Okay, so why bother? I think we kind of covered this in the like, this is a waste of time objection. But basically what I've found, so we didn't used to do roadmaps at AppNexus. Again, I mentioned we were like in this early stage where we didn't know if we were even going to exist. So it just felt very like foolhardy to try to go create like a long-term roadmap. That ended after a few years, but I can't say that we immediately then started creating like really forward-looking roadmaps that helped everyone understand where we were going. It's only been in the last few years that we've reached a level of sort of, I would say, in our case, it's probably discipline, where we actually were able to kind of like write down where we wanted to go and why, and share that with at least an internal audience to get feedback, to face criticism, to hold ourselves accountable, et cetera. So there's all the downsides of like, well, what if the needs of the market change and everything's different and you go in one direction, you should have gone that other direction. Like those things are all going to be risks. But I can't say that those were like the reasons why we personally at AppNexus hadn't been doing this. It was more out of fear that we would like write something in stone, be wrong, and have to like eat crow. Basically, if I were to sit on a psychologist's couch, I think that would be the root cause of why we weren't doing it. And we told ourselves it was because we wanted to be agile and iterative. So just food for thought there. I think there's a ton of room for iteration and being responsive to the market within a roadmap. So I don't want to give the impression that this is like I'm advocating for for a waterfall approach, or like you should write your PRDs and have 50 pages for each thing and all of that. Like definitely not. But I do think at least once you get into a mature state as a company and you're in a mature market, like things aren't going to change so fast that you can't even provide like a 6-month view of what you think is going to come out. Okay. So the reasons why I think this has been really beneficial to us at AppNexus, and some of the things I hope that like everyone here can benefit from. First of all, getting that alignment with stakeholders. So to your point, like people who are saying, well, why are we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? Lots of questions come out when you start to say what you are going to do. Everyone reads between the lines and sees the negative space of everything you're not going to do. And it raises a lot of skeletons in closets. The truth is, like whether or not you publish your roadmap, those things are all not going to get done either way. But people don't know about it, so they kind of stay quiet if you don't tell them you're not doing it. And that gets you through the day, but it doesn't create like a healthy dialogue with the organization about what the top priorities of the company are, how you're going to make money, how your customers are going to find value in what you're offering, et cetera. And so I think that sunlight really does help produce like much better products. And I want to put a little asterisk there to the earlier point about user research and say, this is not to say you should only get feedback from internal stakeholders. That would probably lead to a navel-gazing, like poorly executed actual roadmap. I think it should be informed by stakeholders, especially those in the field who are working with customers every day, and your actual field research that you're doing, that your teams are doing, that hopefully you have user research partners who are doing, So a rich substrate of like information and data that you can build these roadmaps from. Okay, there's like probably an entire product school talk about how to do that, but I'll move on. So secondly, I think being able to rally people to your vision is something that I can't emphasize as a product manager the importance of this enough. If people understand what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it, it's like the C's part. People are just like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, what do you need? And then like, you just go through and you're like, this is easy. Product management's great. Like, why would anybody think this is a hard job? The second people, it's never happened, but like, it sounds good. But the second people are like questioning, they don't understand why you're doing what you're doing. They don't understand. For me, my experience has been more commonly, people don't understand how the pieces fit together. They don't understand the big picture and the system. And so you're like, I need you to do this one thing, and I need you to do this other thing, and I need you to do, and you might be like seeing how it all fits together. If the people around you can't connect those dots, that's where I've started to feel like friction and people not just like pushing back on the actual things we're trying to get done, but just not understanding dependencies in places where they need to be working together or they could be making better decisions because they don't understand how their piece fits in with the whole. So it's about clearing, whatever I said, parting the seas, that's important, but also just like making sure that the team is really empowered to go do better than anything you could have ever done if you tried to order everyone around individually, right? And I said create some drama. That's not the bad kind of drama, like some narrative, story arc type drama with seasons and episodes. Binge watching drama. Okay. That's a good analogy. Wouldn't it be great if people were like binge watching like your product? That's like what people do with like iPhone releases. What's next? Okay. So then finally, I think this is more of an internal, like what's good about doing this for you personally and for maybe like your close team members is just like giving you, again, that discipline to think about what is your strategy, what do you need to be doing, and like boiling it down so that even just you personally understand it. Maybe I should have put that first, but I think the more time you're able to carve out to think about, not just like your current roadmap, the defects you're trying to pay down, like whatever's on fire, the salesperson who won't leave you alone, like whatever it is, and look ahead, it's just like gives you a reason to do that hard thinking about like the strategy and the pieces that you need to move to get your product where it needs to go. Okay. How many steps does it take to develop a long-term roadmap? 3. Okay. As long as you don't count like repeating the thing forever as a step. Okay. So basically the steps that that I follow that are like, I think probably pretty like obvious, and the devil is definitely in the details of these steps. I wanted to boil this down so that everyone feels like this is something that you can kind of wrap your arms around, and this applies to, I think, different levels of roadmap, granular to like very big scale. You prioritize, you basically understand what the opportunities are, you figure out what it's going to take to go capitalize on those opportunities, and then you tell people about it. And then you repeat. I don't think this is very helpful without the next few slides, so I'm just going to keep going. But I think that's like generally what we're going to try to do. So prioritization. I think price value mapping is incredibly important. And this isn't an actual price value map diagram. This is more of like a value, a chart that shows value of relative competitors. But if you can figure out how to quantify, even if it's like quantification of a qualitative perception of your product, if you can figure out how to do this for what you're working on, it makes a lot of the questions about, well, does this rank higher than that, much easier. So I'm going to dive into this a little bit because like I don't think anybody should copy and paste this exact thing, but I think it's a framework that I'm hopeful can be applied to like various different kinds of products. So basically what we did to create this, product 1, product 2, product 3, product 4, these are actually competitor products, and the one that's circled is our product. So, and there's more than just these 4. But basically, there was a voice of the customer study that we did. We actually paid somebody to do this. I don't know how feasible that is for everyone, but I think you could do it with user research. There's probably ways you could bootstrap this pretty easily. or you could just guess. Not sure I recommend that. But basically, we collected a lot of data from our customers and our users about how they rated. I don't think that we asked, like, please fill out a survey and like rate these things on a scale of 1 to 5 or anything like that. It was basically a conversation, tell us what you think about competitor 1, tell us what you think about competitor 2, tell us what you think about the product that we're paid to ask you about, on these various pillars or like value drivers. So basically, usability, customer service, data, product capabilities, and inventory. It's like a really oversimplified way of boiling down the things that our customers really prioritize when they're deciding what product to use. And those things would change dramatically based on what kind of product you're personally representing. I think this could be done for a small part of a product or like, a suite of products. Like there's probably a lot of scalability in here. And then there was some sort of weighting assigned to each of these pillars. And then the product value, which has the gray background, this one here, I think is just the average, like a weighted average of each of these results for each of our competitors. And so to get to the point, and then on the other side, there's sort of like, well, how good is the company? It's the size and scale of the company, the financing of the company, the stability of the company, like these things, I guess, also influence for an enterprise sale kind of situation. People want to make sure they're like not picking somebody who's like on their way out, right, and have to go back to the drawing board and choose again. So those are less influenced by product management decisions, but just good to know about. Okay, so basically, I think the first step to getting to a point where you could have something like this is to really find consensus on what your definition of your value drivers is for your product. And I think we tried to do this internally, and it was interesting. Like, it was hard for us to narrow down the benefits that we thought our customers would perceive to like a handful. We had like 15, right? And so, because you're like, it's your baby, so it's hard to, choose just 5 great things about it or 5 things that you think the customer cares about. But I think that's actually really key because as humans, we can't hold more than 7 things in our working memory. And so the kind of more you can condense that list, the more you can infuse the people who you need to work with that like sense of what those things are. It would be great if you went to like the water cooler and people were able to repeat those 5 value drivers or 4 or 6 or whatever back to you. Because then people are going to start noticing, hey, like, I think that we could do this to improve this. I think we could do that to improve this. The risk is, of course, if you get the wrong ones, you start like massively pouring investment into something that isn't actually going to influence the way your customers feel about your product or how they decide what product to use. That could be a pitfall. So try to avoid that. And I think going back to your customers and validating, if you can, that these are the right things. I think if you have some trusted sort of friendlies, that could be a good approach. Okay, so let's see. We were basically able to quantify, again, this is the perception of our customers, how, in our case, a scale of 1 to 3, which is a pretty small scale, like how these different companies stacked up on these different value driver areas. And it gave us a really good benchmark that we could say, okay, like, we didn't really dispute these numbers. They seemed about right based on what we've heard from our customers over the years. And we have tons and tons of qualitative and quantitative data over like NPS surveys and all of our like research conversations to provide specifics as to why we might have gotten these ratings. So that's really important. Just these numbers with nothing behind it would be pretty hard to make use of. And so we were able to say, okay, even if we just picked, so we're below, these are like some big players in the industry, let's say, who have way more backing than we do. But let's say we can get something like usability from a perceived 2 to a 2.5. And we can move the needle on a few other numbers, not all of them. We don't want to spread the peanut butter across everything and end up sort of not being able to make that much progress. But if we were able to concert our effort on a few things, what would that do to our overall score? And I don't know if people are familiar. Is price value mapping a concept that people have heard of? Yeah, sort of. So basically, yeah. The theory, for anybody who's not familiar, who hasn't really dived into it, there's a really interesting McKinsey article, I think it's probably Googleable, that's about just the deep dive into price value mapping. But basically the concept is you can plot your value, that overall score in the far right, you can plot that for each of your competitors with value on one axis and price, or perception of price, even if it's just low to high. And I realize for consumer product where it's free, your value is different. It'd be the strength of your network or something like that. But anyway, bear with me as I talk about enterprise more. If you have a price that you're associating your product with, you can see how those things plot on a map. And you can draw a line. Let's say this is price. I don't really remember which is which. Value. Okay, so, overall, let's say this is 1, 2, 3. We're at, and this is 10% of my overall cost, 15%, 20%. I don't know. These might be dollar figures, whatever. So overall, we're at a 2, let's call it a 2, I guess it's a 2.3 is what we ended up at. But we have a pretty low price relative to our competitors, just if you imagine these are relative numbers. Some of our competitors have, almost close to a 3, but they're way above us in price, right? Okay, and then there's a middle ground one. Let's just make it really simple. So you can start to see how there's kind of a line. That's a pretty steep slope. But if you have here's where it gets interesting. So let's say we have a product that's at a 1. It's also 10%. Anything on this side of the line is considered to be in a place where it's going to be losing market share. It is not going to be able to continue to win customers. In fact, customers are going to be wait a minute, I'm paying 10%, but these guys offer it too. Why the heck am I spending my money on this product when this one's better and the same price, right? It makes perfect sense, unless it's a irrational economy, but that can't be true. So then on the other side, let's say you're able to say, okay, we're going to get from a 2 in value to a 3, which would be a pretty big jump. But let's say you could do that. Now on this side of the line, you're going to start taking share from other folks. I'm at the same, I don't think I drew this quite right. Let's say it's not quite a 3, it's a whatever this one was. So now you're offering the same value as this higher price competitor, but for way cheaper. So you're going to take all their lunch, right? So that's just the basic theory of price value mapping. And if you can get to the point where you can do this, so it's basically we've done all the value mapping, and these are the ultimate numbers that you plot on this axis. And then you have a sense from talking to customers and knowing where you lost money from people and everything like that, you kind of know relatively, even if you can't specifically put dollar values on here, you can be low, medium, high, or whatever, right? And you can say, okay, we're probably lower and they're probably higher, and then you can get a sense, a good enough sense that you can start to understand what you need to do. So it's interesting. So we're going to try to make some investments, basically the outcome of this exercise. Let's go figure out, our roadmap is going to tell us how do we get from a 2 to a 2.5 on usability, 1 to 2 on customer service, which is a little bit of product work, but mostly hiring, and then 2.5 to 3 on our data front. And we're going to, and some other things, getting bought by AT&T is going to help us with some of our financials and such. And we're going to get to an overall 2.8. Puts us, I should have probably put this at a 2.8 or something, but it puts us at par, let's say, with our top competitor. But we are I think in reality, in our situation, we're way lower priced because we have had lower value, so we've had to try to stay on that line by lowering our price. And we may not be able to immediately start taking share from them, but these guys are at risk, right? And they can't necessarily drop their price because they might be public. and they might have shareholders that are looking at their price and blah, blah, blah. So that's like a way to think about product strategy when you have like this kind of data that you can go from. Even if it's not perfect, don't make this perfect. Just try to make it like good enough that you can make decisions based on it. Make sense? Crystal clear? Okay. Okay. I just have a few more slides. Let me just step through the last few here. So ideally, after you get through this exercise, this gives you a framework to figure out, okay, if we only have so many resources, we're going to invest them in these areas, and here's like a stack rank list based on customer feedback, like feedback from our field teams, et cetera, of like what we need to go build to move the needle on these areas. So then you need to figure out, to put together a roadmap, you have to be able to tell people kind of when things are going to come. Like that's part of the, I think, part of the equation. And so I don't think you can do this for, you know, an 18-month long time frame. I think it starts to be like the further out you get, the like bigger your time horizons are. So usually we'll be able to estimate pretty granularly for like the coming 6 weeks or the coming quarter, because you're in that kind of granular roadmap 3 type. But the further out you get, the more it's like coming in the second half of the year, coming in the next 5 years. Like, you know what I mean? You just get further and further out in your horizons. But one challenge that we had was we needed to go, and this, I don't know if others have this issue. I think some companies are like, our challenge is we can't get enough people to do the work. Ours is like we can't get enough money from the company to like hire the people who need to do the work. So we needed to explain to them how the work we needed to do was more than the people we had, and how much investment we needed to get the right people in the chairs to do the work. So that's why all this like strategy and like value mapping and everything is really helpful and important, because you can say, hey, wouldn't it be great if we had a 2.8 on that previous slide? Well, here's what it's going to cost you to get to that point. And so we sat down, we had kind of there's a approach called Inception, which we used, but you can do lots of different things. Design sprints, things like that can help you kind of get from a very foggy idea of like, we should do something in this area, to getting to like a slightly less foggy idea of like, yeah, it feels like this is one of these options would probably be right. And I can talk a little bit about that process that we used, but basically we were able to size out in like months of work to a relatively high level of confidence, like 60%, I'd say, not 100%. That like we had people to do the things that were in green on this list, and that they would be done roughly in like these quarters. These are made up items, but I used a real smart sheet that we created. And so for us, we had to work with multiple engineering teams for each of these rows. These are like big projects that are like pretty complicated and required coordination. So our product managers came in and they said, we have these goals. Like at the end of like, you know, to achieve X result, we need to enable the user to do this, this, and this. Let's say they broke it down like that. And then people in the room, we had like engineering leads for each of the different areas that we knew that the product was going to touch. They would say, like, ask a bunch of questions. Sometimes you like reconvene because you have too many open questions, but you basically kind of get to the crux of like, what would it take for you to understand roughly like how much it's going to take to build this? Kind of like meta sizing, and if you use like a Scrum process. And then people say, well, I think that's probably like 4 weeks. I think that's 8 weeks. I think that's 12 weeks. I think that's 100 weeks or whatever it is. They might be wrong, and you're like, I'm not holding you to this. Like, you're not going to be in trouble if you don't meet these. We just need to see, of the people we have in staff, let's say this is a 12-week project, like how many of our people would need to get that done in order to meet the timeline that we want. And then you're like, and we ran out of people. That's all the people we have, and we have more projects, and like that's where you have the gray boxes on here. Those are just completely unstaffed, and we have to go make a case to hire people to go fill in those seats. So that was how we approached this. And it gave engineers, I think, a sense of confidence that they had a really strong voice in the process, because what we had done prior, which was a bad practice, was like the product manager would be like, that feels like a medium, and that feels like an extra small, you know, and just kind of like finger in the wind. Maybe you ask like your buddy who's like your counterpart in engineering, but it didn't have any kind of like real deep thought involved. And so your product roadmap sort of becomes just like garbage in, garbage out kind of situation. So we took this, and we were able to get approval for those TBH heads because it was clear, like, we have to do these things, and we need people in the seats to do them. And then we were able to convert this into what we ended up being able to share as our roadmap with some sandbagging. So that's not a science either, but basically we're like, we didn't put it on here, but one of the things we talked about in this process was like, what's your degree of confidence that you have the information you need to give us this estimate? And so it could be like high, medium, low. And so people, in some cases, we had done so much work and prep and prototyping and already done cycles of client feedback and things like that. We're like, all we have to do is just execute this, turn it from a prototype into production, and we know it's gonna do what it needs to do. That was, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 of the items on here were in that category. And a lot of them were we haven't even started, we're just really far. So those would be low confidence areas, and those would be where I'd be add 2 quarters, because we just know we have to iterate. We know we have to do a lot of work to get to a point where we feel like we have an answer. That's how I did it. And then we were able to put this into kind of okay, quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. Here's the kind of short list of big projects that we expect to be able to get out into the market in some fashion. And we had an internal version of that was a tiny bit more detailed, and then we enabled our teams to, I guess I'm getting into my next slide, spread the word, put things into a very high-level iconographic style of roadmap. And I really, the main takeaway here is just if you don't tell people what you're going to build, someone else is going to fill in those gaps for you, and you might not like what they say. And maybe this is an enterprise view, but our sales team would just go and build our roadmap for us and be I wish it was this. That sounds good. And then the vapor goes out the door, and we're held to to those commitments, and everyone hates their life. Don't be like that. So I think the more that a product manager can partner with marketing and kind of make sure that everyone's on the same page about what the themes are, polished up for an external audience, how the things you're working on fit into those themes. Ideally, in parentheses, you could be something red, Q3, something blue, Q4, or whatever the right way for your organization is to convey this kind of information. It gives your sales team something that, if you have a sales team, something that they can go tell your customers, hey, we have this gap, and here's how it's going to be filled and when. And then you have your internal teams can start building their processes to go commercialize your product based on these timelines. And that's really important. Oh, I need to put this into my budget from a marketing perspective because we're going to go announce this big thing at this big event or whatever it is. So that is where you want to end up. And then you iterate up and to the right. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, thank you. That's all I had.